morning, everyone. I'm Karan Singh, Marketing Manager with UINCEPT.
Good morning. I am Abhinav Chauhan, handling investor relations at UINCEPT, and we welcome you to the most awaited event at UINCEPT, iXi Summit 2022. I am delighted to welcome the CEO of Aakash Education, Mr. Abhishek Maheshwari, for the keynote address. Mr. Maheshwari, over to you, sir.
Hi, guys.
Welcome, sir.
Morning.
It's my pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me. So I have a a few slides to sort of just talk through 10-15 minutes of quick observations on what's going on in the edtech world in India. So we'll get started right away. So this is again edtech's been the buzzword over the last I'd say more so over the last 3 years. Obviously, in the last 2 years since the pandemic began, it's become even bigger, and lots of things about edtech. It's sort of a catch-all phrase for a lot of things that are happening in the world of education, whether it's digital learning, classrooms, collaboration, future of education, gamification, hybrid learning. Lots of things are happening. Our education system has been more or less, I'd say, stayed and status quoist for the last century or so. The way we went to school, the way our children have been going to school, the way our grandparents went to school hasn't really changed that much for a very, very long time. But now it's all changing. And really, I think nothing sums up where we are than this quote by Victor Hugo. It is an idea whose time has come. Right, the fact that education needs to fundamentally evolve for the world that we live in, for the next generations of learners, whether they are school children or adults, it does need to change. And there are enough forces at work that it is starting to change, and it is an idea whose time has come. So again, I know it's probably not not the right time to be quoting Russians, but Lenin had said that there are decades when nothing happens, and then there are weeks when decades happen, and that's really what happened a couple of years back. I think online learning, a lot of the technology around online learning, a lot of the consumer expectation, a consumer habit had begun to change almost since the advent of internet over the last 20 years or so. But it was a slow change, slow habit formation, and then end of early 2020, once the pandemic happened, we had trial at scale. Almost 800-900 million school children all across the world started to learn online. A lot of the players that had been around, such as Coursera, edX, just saw a phenomenal change in the uptake of what was happening. Right, closer home, if you look at edtech apps, what happened in April versus what was happening just prior to the pandemic. There was doubling, tripling, quadrupling of the downloads, of the interest of people, because suddenly that was really the only way left to learn in a world which was locked down. So it was a seminal moment. I think years from now we'll look back at this was the point at which things started to change meaningfully for education in general, with online learning as a catalyst for that change, right? This edtech funding has been increasing over the years. It's still, I would say, a significantly underinvested sector compared to all of the other sectors that one talks about. Considering the size of the market, considering that almost every adult in every child, every adult in globally, those that have access go through between 12 to 18 or even longer years of education. So it's a massive market, but it has been massively underfunded over the years. But that started to change, once internet penetration and digital access, all of that became since the middle of the decade. But obviously, it took off in last year and has continued that rise. So in the 10 years, right, like no other sector, we had about less than $1 billion of investments in 2010, 11, 12. And then in 2020 we had 16. That trend has continued in 2021 and seems to continue now. So clearly the funding, the interest in edtech is starting to come good. and that's a great sign for all of us that are involved in this sector. I have spent a lot of years in the media industry, and I like to for me it's easier to just see the progress of these two industries in parallel. Both effectively started in this current form in early 19th century, once the radio signal was invented, that began the radio waves communication radio. But media and pretty much the school system in its current form started around that time, where you have cohorts of children studying in a particular class, and we moved from a more skill based economy to education knowledge based. That journey started then. But education since then did not change much for the last 150 years or so. Media, on the other hand, went from print to radio to television to OTT to streaming, all of that. So media as an industry embraced pretty much every wave of technological change, whereas education did not. Having said that, with the penetration of internet and access, that seems to be that is definitely changing, and we can see that happen. Why I also say education is underfunded is, if you look at, say, a company like Netflix, right? We all are exposed to all of the content that is being produced now. Netflix in an average year, currently spending between 15 to 20 billion dollars in creating entertainment content. There is no education company, absolutely none, that is even in the same zip code, right? That is even spending a few $100 million in creating educational content. Whereas if you look at that amount of time spent, the societal outcomes in every which way you look at it, there is larger consumption of education, both in terms of number of people and number of hours, which is why I say that education has been grossly underfunded, and that paradigm is beginning to shift, and that's a harbinger of good things to come for this sector. I think another way to just look at it, if if I were to ask this group to name the top 5 education companies in the world, notwithstanding the current, the BYJU'S, and which are obviously a lot in the news, but globally, uh, the top 5 education companies in the world, most of you will be hard pressed to name them. And even if you name the ones, they're not going to be as large as some of the other sector. If I were to ask you the top 5 media companies, or the top 5 pharma companies, or the top 5 banks, or all, you would very easily be able to name those companies. And that's a there have education's always been in the sort of this middle of whether it's public sector responsibility, whether it's the responsibility of the government or of the private sector. So it's always been a regulated space, and therefore hasn't really seen this kind, and underfunded, and hasn't seen the kind of global giants that you see in most other consumer markets. There is no reason why that should be the case, but that's just how business and has evolved over the years. And therefore, if you look at it, just a simple comparison, right? Like the global healthcare market is a $8 trillion market. This data is probably a little bit dated, but still, the order of magnitudes. Healthcare market is about 8 trillion, and the global healthcare market cap is about 5 trillion. That's if you take the top 20 to 50 pharma companies and add up their market cap. The global education market is more than 5 trillion, significantly more than 5 trillion, and the global education market cap is a lot less. Obviously, there are a lot of public institutions, private institutions that are catering to this need, but education's not been a big participant in the public markets as well. So that's another sort of statistic that shows that there is a significant room to create very, very large companies in the education space, from all over the world, and particularly from India. We'll talk about that. Again, I'll not belabor the point. We've all been reading the headlines. It is truly an idea whose time has come. There's a lot more talk about. You pick up the newspaper from, say, 5 years back, you would not read much of this. But today we can see that, right? The funding, the EdTech, the different business models that are coming into play, etc. Even in India, education spending by the government has been minuscule, right? So we are lower than the global average. Our GDP per capita is anyways low, and on top of that, the percentage we are spending on education, even as the government sector, is significantly lower than most other, obviously, organized economies, but even the unorganized ones at some level. And if I do this math at a per capita level, it comes out to be even less. So absolute spend in education's not grown, as well, not grown as much as our GDP has grown. So that's another thing, that while the government is responsible for a large part of our education, we do, like with many other sectors, the private sector, the global capital needs to be able to bridge this gap if we have to significantly change outcomes for our education system. Again, there is, I think anyone who's in this room or has thought about this sector even for more than a few minutes realizes the scale of the opportunities. We have over 25 crore students enrolled in pre-primary to higher secondary. We have a very, very large young population, the 20 to 34 year olds that are coming into the workforce and could definitely do with more learning, skill building. So there is, any which way you look at it, our gross enrollment ratios are still, while we have crossed the literacy chasm in India over the last few decades, the gross enrollment ratio in secondary and then higher secondary is still, anything less than 100% here should not be acceptable to a country like ours. So there is definitely scope at every which level to increase the number of people getting access to education, and all of this throws its own kinds of opportunities. Yeah, lots of projections. Any analyst you pick up, they'll project the kind of growth that we are expected to see. But I am not a big believer in these numbers in their current form, because this is all supply driven. If we are able to create the right solution, there is no reason why these numbers shouldn't be multifold of what is being projected. This is really because on the demand side, there is it is an infinite problem. There is infinite demand for in a figure of speech, for education and the right solutions. So if we can come up with the right kinds of modes of learning at the right price points, there is no limit to what is possible here. Lots of tailwind in India. There is what changed in India over the last few years, about apart from the global phenomena of EdTech becoming interesting is that, 4 or 5 years back, with the coming of Geo and the upgrade of the entire telecom networks in the country, the internet access became much more wider than it was, say, 5 years back. And that just means that there are more ways to reach students. Access has always been one of the big problems to solve in education. That how do you give access? How do you give the best teachers to the best students at the right time? And digital certainly helps with that, and scale helps with that, capital helps with that. So we have a lot of confluence of these things coming together. There is high awareness about online. There is, because everyone's tried it in some sense, there is greater willingness to pay than there was traditionally. India is also becoming a more richer country, and we are seeing that a large part of this global education funding, the proportion that is coming to India is now higher than in most other sectors. In fact, it's probably the highest, like within the total funding in EdTech, the amount of funding that's coming in India is larger, and that's helping. I'll just wrap this up in a couple of minutes. So I'll.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ms. Maheshwari. That will be great.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
but the panel is
again,
already
all this
ready.
data is available publicly. There is eight. There are almost and the good thing is India is an entrepreneurial country. People are always looking for solutions. We don't have such a big organized labor market, so most people are entrepreneurs in their own way. And we've had over 10,000 education companies founded in the last 5 years or so, and almost 800 plus have got funded, some level of funding. And we obviously have a handful of about half a dozen unicorns. We have lots of fund companies that have raised more than 10, 50, $100 million. So it's a good time to be looking at solutions. Obviously, it's going to take some time to find the truly scalable ones. Some of them have hit that trajectory, but there is still a lot of problems to be solved. Like I said, it's an infinite problem. Lots of problems to be solved in the education sector. I think the other impetus will come from the national education policy. There is a sea change. India hasn't really touched its own secondary, higher secondary, the mode of education, university education. The construct hasn't really changed much in the last few decades. But now the government's taken a bold step. The policy framework exists, which is more broad based, around based on diversity, context, reviews, critical thinking, inclusion, conceptual understanding, use of technology, community. So there are all of these concepts are now, the framework exists. Obviously, it all needs to come into execution, and that's where I again think that the private sector and the global funding, the technology, all of that will play a big part in moving things in the right direction. and making the core foundational principles of NEP a success. You guys, probably most of the people in the room know about a lot about these companies. There is opportunities across, whether it's K-12, test prep, reskilling. There's opportunities across the spectrum. Lots of companies beginning to address that, and still a lot of white spaces and gaps. Yeah, again, across learning stages there are opportunities. There are a few challenges. All of them are being addressed, but there is digital infrastructure still at the last mile access for I'd say a large proportion of the population. Still some work to be done there. Digital literacy, the regulations are always challenging in a sector like this, and there is abundance of content of varying qualities, and there is no way to sort of for a user to figure that out. And education in India has always been about outcomes. In any low income, middle income country, you'll see that more, that it has been about outcomes. And that till we create capacity at that scale, both at higher education level and then in the job market, education without outcomes means less in our country. And the only way it becomes really meaningful is if we are able to create requisite outcomes, whether it's from schools or from colleges or from in the job market. So I think that's pretty much it. I think that's a snapshot of everything that's going on in the education market. There is obviously a lot going on if you peel the onion and go deeper. But it's a great, it's a very interesting sector. Lots of dynamics at play, but a lot of good strong tailwinds from every which direction. So all of you looking to do things in this space, wish you all the best. And may you be able to make a dent in this. What's this is also, it goes without saying that it's essential for nation building. This is pretty much the only guaranteed way of economic mobility and long-term nation building. So the more energy and intellect we can get into this sector, and more capital, the better it'll be for all of us and for the country as a whole. So all the best, and thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Maheshi, for those amazing insights, and it was really great to have you.